Stock and Roll, the podcast where we deep dive into the world of equity compensation. Today, we are exploring something that in my mind makes UK a bit different than all other jurisdictions when it comes to equity, and that's its community. I'm joined by Sophie Altaf, head of ProShare, who brings 20 years of experience across the share plan industry from the provider side, and David Mortimer, head of external affairs. In this episode, we will get into why the UK has built the world's most mature employee ownership ecosystem. We also discuss ProShare's role in lobbying and making the plans even better. Lastly, we explore how broad-based plans may drive long-term wealth also for lower-income employees. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of Stock and Roll. Today I'm super lucky to be in London together with David and Sophie from ProShare. I will let you introduce yourself. Do you want to start, Sophie?
Sure. Hi, Christopher and audience. I'm Sophie Altaf. I've been 20 years in share plans. I've worked in the provider side up until now with firms including Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Accurate Equity, where we met, Computershare, Equitex, and Fidelity. So during this time, I'd say I've always supported the industry through my roles. For example, about 10 years, I was leading the Geo UK chapter in London, which I'm very proud of, and they continue to do a great job. And we'll be working in partnership with ProShare and Geo a lot to see where we can support the industry better as a community. And I joined as head of ProShare last summer, and I'm delighted to support such an important organisation.
And hi, I'm David Mortimer. I work with ProShare, but my main role is with the Chartered Governance Institute. ProShare sits as part of us because of the link across into good governance and how the share plans complement that. But my background is in lobbying and campaigning. I've done that in public and private companies and various technological outfits across the years. I am not an expert in the share plan industry. I'll leave that to Sophie. My job is the campaigning.
Super. And I think for me personally, the cool thing with talking with you is that UK is uniquely good at building a community around employee share plans. And ProShare sits in the center of that, right? Not as a vendor, but as a hub. And I think what I'd like to cover a bit today is why it works and what sort of value it creates and what matters most right now, right? So I'll starting off then with the first question. So for listeners also outside of UK, what is ProShare and why does it exist?
Well, ProShare really, as you say, is the hub for UK employee share ownership, and it's been around for a long time, longer than my tenure in share plans. It started off in 1992. It was established by the British government, a group of FTSE 100 companies and the London Stock Exchange. And it was really there to promote wider share plan ownership and understanding and awareness. So today, ProShare is unique in that it focuses solely on helping to promote employee share ownership in the UK and is the voice of employee share plan professionals. And we're entirely funded by our members, so we can serve them the best through our educational, informational and career support services, as well as when it comes to lobbying the government for change, which David will be speaking about more today as well. And being part of CGI, the Chartered Governance Institute, which was established even earlier in 1891, we support all types of company in creating and maintaining structures of governance and excellence. And part of that, I would say, is how your employees are feeling and functioning. So with the UK being the world's second biggest stock market, it's also got a lot more players and all types of companies here. And I think ProShare is really important in bringing that all together.
Yeah. And you mentioned the history. Is it the mission of ProShare, kind of how has that evolved, if any, throughout the period? Is that something you can talk a bit about?
I think like anything, there's always an evolution, but I think really the core mission has always remained the same, which is to have an awareness of employee share ownership and to support that. So whatever anyone needs, and that's where I guess the evolution is, right? So if regulation changes or there is a more ability for people to take up share plans, we want to be the place people can come to for questions and support, networking, help, guidance of any kind.
UK versus other jurisdictions, obviously, like you're a bit biased, but why is UK so good at this? What do you think are the reasons of ProShare being that important hub? A thing that we may see not that central in other countries.
I think, again, with it being a large stock market, is a natural reason that is a focus there. But I think people are passionate here. They really want to see employee share ownership as not just a thing to help companies, but to help employees. So looking at the sort of socio-economic support that we can offer as well. So there might be people who don't normally get to benefit from wealth creation opportunities in their day-to-day life. But if they're at work and they're being supported and educated and given these opportunities, it's that first step to kind of safely, low risk often, go into that world and start thinking about investing. So I think maybe that's why. And then obviously what uniquely we do at ProShare is our lobbying work with the government.
And just to add on that, I think one of the other sort of potential benefits of it is that share plans have been championed by both parties. It's a cross-party issue. No party is against it. We had our first sort of plans come in under a Conservative government, and the second main sort of all-employee plan came in under a Labour government. So the benefits are, you slightly shape them differently depending upon which kind of MP you're meeting, but there's a common understanding and acceptance that it's good for the UK and it's good for employees. The ProShare started as a vehicle out of Treasury, out of a government department, along with the stock exchange. That shows the impetus behind it from the beginning.
And how much do you think the popularity of ProShare and the share plans here, how much of that can you credit that you actually have the SIP and the SAYEs and programs that are lucrative compared to others? This is a bit like a chicken or the egg thing, right? But how important is that to you?
I think internationally, there's probably similar things in the sense of in the US, you've got 423 plans. So you do get tax advantage plans in other locations. I think where in the UK, it's become the bread and butter. And maybe this is to do with, before my time, the early work that ProShare and the government and other organizations might have been doing to make it really clear that these tax advantage plans are an easy win for the company and the employee. And I think it was almost, the first question is, why shouldn't you have a share plan? Why shouldn't you give equity, right? Which I think anyone listening to this podcast will already know why it's a good idea. You've got the typical things of talent, retention, attraction, and motivation. But beyond that, it's company culture. It's taking people on the journey. It's giving back to society as well. And
I think it's a bit like, why these things are, or how important this is for the popularity of share plans generally, but also ProShare.
Yeah.
If we were taking kind of the things that you're doing here, let's say I'm Norwegian. In Norway, we don't have this sort of community at all. So what would be the key, if we were to start, what would be the most important 2-3 things to think about that you've done well here, you think?
I think collaboration is really the thing. I think we talked about it before we started the podcast. If we were having this conversation down the pub, I think that's a very British concept, right? So people like to sit down, they like to talk, they like to share, and they like to network. I think that's really probably the first and foremost thing, is that everybody wants to have a community and have that network. No one's happy just working in isolation. So I think ProShare does that really well, but it is also something that culturally, maybe in the UK, is a natural thing. And I definitely know since I've come along, one of the things that's kept me interested in share plans, I fell into this by complete accident. I didn't know what share plans were. I know this was an industry, like most people probably, but once I got into it, there were these amazing people who'd been in it for ages, looking at different things, some real experts. I could probably say a name like Pat Sims, and half the people listening would be like, oh yeah, I remember. And it's just seeing the passion and the drive and the desire for change and growth, and it is beneficial to people. So I know they do it as a day job and they want to have operating share plans for a company, but actually most people who work in this space are thinking about it in terms of how it's benefiting humans and employees and people they know. And I think so that passion goes from that, and then you become collaborative. I think where ProShare is really good is we are happy to have a conversation about anything with anyone. We've created this great community of support for listed companies. Well, it only makes sense that we do more for private companies now. We want to take that and think about, how do we create that same community for private? Because those guys are out there quite siloed, looking in their companies. Often they don't even have other people within their companies to talk about equity. So it's again giving them that place to come to if they've got a question, and no question is silly, no idea is wrong. And that's really, I think, what's been the success, is the people in this industry.
Definitely.
I think there's another aspect of it on top of that, which is that there's a tipping point with anything. And in terms of the UK, the number of FTSE companies, FTSE 100s, that have some form of all-employee share plan is pretty ubiquitous. It's a standard. So it becomes a case there of success breeds success.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a share plan, then you might be scratching your head thinking, well, why does this one not have one? So there's an element of it's there at a certain level. But of course, the community is so important for us to make sure that it stays a priority within those companies, and it stays as something that they see as a real benefit.
But I think looking at other jurisdictions that I'm historically more familiar with, it's mature. It's come to a stage where it's very common, and also the benefits of having it is kind of big versus not having it. And now I'm thinking like tax-wise, and it's really, really an established structure around it. And I think that's the part where also the other jurisdictions that I see have a lot to learn from. Of course, that's politics, right? But yeah.
I think that's really interesting. But within any sort of mature system, what the danger is, what we have to guard against is that it's taken for granted.
Yeah.
And that actually the energy that was set into putting it into place and to celebrating its achievements isn't dissipated by familiarity. You know, we need to keep it as a benefit that's recognized and talked about.
Are you ever challenged on like, now I'm thinking also generally, but on like, what are the gains for giving away the tax reliefs? Is that a thing here where you have to prove or to justify, or is that kind of just set?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I've often had that conversation here. You know, companies are giving something, employees are giving something, but so is the government. As you say, it's giving a tax relief. And actually, we know within the industry that companies celebrate this. We know that employees value the benefit of it, but actually government is very quiet. I've personally sort of said to ministers, we think that you could make a bigger deal of this, because actually you don't champion it very much.
No.
It's there, it's within Treasury, it's taken for granted, it's not threatened, thank goodness. However, there are other areas where the government is more overt about saying, here's a benefit that we give to you. And there's a lot of discussion in the UK at the moment about employment rights under the new government. So they're changing that. This is another benefit, but it's not one that's championed. But if it works for the government, that's fine. But we think they could sell it more themselves.
Yeah, and I also kind of, how much more does it create for the country? Because it can also be like, you attract more talent, more companies come here, it's higher growth setup. You don't need to salarize that high because you can compensate with other things in a start or early stage, right? And then if you're good at doing this in the right way, it could be a tool of a country kind of growing. I know I'm biased on these things, but it's
No. You're quite right, because that's one of the studies and the research that have gone into share plans. You know, I've looked at the benefits, but the idea that there is greater engagement amongst employees, but also there have been studies on greater productivity. So if you're looking at percentages, and I think the last one was a bit of a while ago here, but I know that there's been other studies in other countries as well, talked about 3.5% uplift in productivity. Now, the UK as a nation has been talking about trying to lift its productivity for decades.
Yeah.
And actually anything that can point towards a lift in productivity because of engagement with staff or whatever other reason it is a strong plus. So when you look at the tax that you're talking about before, there is a benefit, but it might not be one that can be calculated in hard numbers.
No.
But if you look at that idea that it's 3.5%, and then you look across the number of companies that are engaged in these plans, you're talking about a large benefit to the economy.
Yeah, and these companies, they grow and they have more and more people, and there's more kind of social security paid, taxes paid, right? Sometimes it's hard to isolate it. Yeah.
That's maybe going to come out later, but there are local benefits as well, local economy, local community.
Definitely. Are there any places where you see that UK still falls short, challenges that are still there, things to be solved? Or are you at a state where if we keep where we're now, then it will be great?
In regards to share plans?
Generally, yes.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've been working and lobbying the government for the last couple of years with the Treasury represents some of the challenges, because there's a lot of awareness, as you say, it's like a stable market for plans here, but things that worked 20, 30, 50 years ago aren't maybe so relevant today. So one of those things is young people engaging them, or maybe it's a bit more of a transient workforce now generationally. Trying to tie people in maybe isn't the right thing, but actually making it attractive and changing things. So there's definitely some challenges. And I think even with the SIP and SAYE report last year, we can see a little bit year on year, there's a little bit of decline of companies that are putting in place new SIP and SAYE plans. Now, that doesn't mean people don't believe in share plans anymore. It just means that maybe they're weighing up the tax advantage element versus other things of what fits their company culture, what their employees are what's easier for them to administer globally. Because most companies are international, but historically we've all been saying, you know, if you've got employee base in the UK, you've got to have tax advantage plans, and a lot of them have done that, and it still is the case. But I think there is a little slight mind shift of going, take a step back and go, is this the right thing for us, or actually we're better off just not worrying about tax advantage and having a global plan or doing something different. So I think there definitely are shifts and changes and challenges. And David, I'll let you talk a little bit more about the lobbying work that we've done with HMT, because I think there is a goal that we'd love to get to.
I think all this share plans, everything takes place in a changing environment, doesn't it? So I mentioned these plans started back in 1980, I think it was the first one. And think about the change to society over all that time. We don't work the same way. half of us are working remotely half the time in the UK now, but also, as Sophie mentioned, the expectation of a job for life is long gone. People move around. So does a company really want to, for our point of view, penalise somebody who's young and successful, who they might want to have come back and work with them in some way or another if they leave, but leave with a potential tax outcome around share plans? It doesn't seem sensible, doesn't seem like a good thing for championing these plans. But also you're looking at the wider environment of what the government's trying to achieve. At the moment, we're looking at, for example, the Chancellor's discussion last summer in something called the Leeds Reforms, where they're looking for more people, more retail investments, so more individuals investing in stocks and shares. And actually, as an industry, this is one that's been teaching people and educating people about what shares are across all levels within an organization for decades. But actually, the government's looking at a campaign. How can we do this? Well, and we're saying over here, look, we know a bit about this. Why not come and talk to us so we can work with you on this? But the changes, tax changes, means that the environment changes in a different way too. So that impetus around encouraging people to invest in stocks and shares is also matched by tax changes that have come through. So we have a capital gains tax here, and the allowance for that has decreased a lot in recent years. So of course that means there's a behaviour change for people that are involved in the plans. And that can lead to different discussions within the industry, different outcomes in terms of what we call ISAs, saving vehicles, and what behaviour change is happening there. And for us, it's really important to track it so that we can explain it back, watch what problems there might be, anticipate them, talk to government about avoiding them, but also emphasise about how our work can complement the outcomes that they want. Because that is the art of lobbying, really. It's very hard to, I think of lobbying as applying pressure to get the decision process you want, the decision makers that can enact it. And actually, it can be, this is quite a technical area. When I go to MPs and talk to them, most of them haven't heard of this, particularly under the new government. It's not their background. So unless they've had the direct opportunity, they don't know about it. But once we explain it, they can see it's a good thing. But ideally, what you want to do is work with the government on any policy they've got, because you've automatically got a far better chance of getting their attention if you're can potentially help them get to a policy outcome that they want to get to anyway.
Which is somewhere where I think we are quite, we're on an upward trajectory with that at the moment now.
I hope so, yeah.
But I think it's also like, I know I've been mentioning that in another episode before, but it's, to me, there's a responsibility generally in being either an issuer, basically a company that have a lot of employees, or us as an administrator, and even you as the hub, right? Because it's like, how do you make sure that participants in especially broad-based programs, they need to be as qualified as you can when you do the investment. If I want to invest into a fund or into somewhere else, I need to go through a course. I need to be a professional investor. And so here we're talking about like blue-collar workers that have not the education and not the background to understand it. So how do you manage to get to a level, someone taking that responsibility and making sure that, okay, there's risk, there's upsides, but there's also downside. How do you make people learn so they take qualified decisions? And then when they invest into a company, which is their employer, all eggs in one basket, how can you try helping understanding that, okay, this may be a good thing if share price grows, if it goes bad negatively, it goes down. But then again, think into something else to differentiate, not putting your money in a mattress where inflation will eat it up, right? I think there's a lot in this where if the right, again, companies or you or us are good at educating, you can actually have an impact on people, on society, on pension gaps, right? And then that's why I think this is very interesting what you're doing, right? And of course, the lobbying side, but also the training and the awareness side of it is super, super exciting.
So you mean to tell me I have to take my money out the mattress?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think back a bit to ProShare and the events that you're having. I think one thing that I've often found a bit challenging sometimes with these kind of conferences, how do you balance and avoid that it becomes some sort of a place where there's a lot of administrators like us coming in there and using it as a place to sell? That may be okay, but a balance. And it's also, if it's only administrators there, it won't be what the purpose is as well. So could you tell me, how do you want this to be for ProShare?
Yeah. Now I'm going to show my age because I want to say a strapline from a movie that's really old. Build it and they will come. Does anyone know what that movie is? Field of Dreams of Kevin Costner. Come on, guys. And I do think that is the thing. If you're building the organisation for the people who are at the heart of it, which is the issuing companies, we don't interact with the employees, then you will get everything else around it as a byproduct. And I think we do that. We very much are focused on interacting with issuers, understanding their needs, understanding what support they need. They're very involved with us. We have focus groups for members that are even run by issuers. So they lead on what is the content that, you know, my colleagues want to know about. How can we help educate each other? It's that community again. So when it comes to events and conferences, it's quite simple. We're focused on what is it that's going to be helpful to them. So typically, for example, with our annual conference, it's always been like these short, sharp sessions on different topics, and it's evolved over time with some keynote speakers. And then absolutely, you know, providers, vendors, advisors, everyone's going to come because they want to see those guys. But that's also a community, right? Because you're not just selling. Maybe I'm just romantic about it, but I've been a provider. And I think if you are going to do a 1980s car salesman approach, it's not going to work. But if you genuinely see it as your community that you're part of, what you're actually doing is you're helping people solve their problems. And it's the conversations. And so it's back to down the pub. That this is what Share Plans is about. It's such a community. So I think the issuers value having their advisors and providers around them to have those conversations and find those solutions. Just because you've been with the same provider for 10 years doesn't mean it might be easy because it's just, you know it, but it doesn't mean that they're solving all of your current problems anymore. So sometimes that means it might lead to you wanting to change provider or enlist another advisor or whatever it might be, or you go and speak to another issuer and you learn more. And me coming to ProShare is for me, it's been an amazing thing because I've been a ProShare member all the time, wherever I've been. So I've seen it from the other side, and I've been doing my other things with other organizations. And then I've come here and I've gone, okay, now I'm behind the curtain and what are we doing? And there's a little bit also of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which is fine. So we're going, okay, well, what could we do more? So I've spent a lot of time having conversations with our members over the last few months. So one of the things at the conference that would be cool to do this year is to go, actually, well, we've got our users who need the technical content, who maybe don't get out there day to day and speak to other issuers, providers, advisors, and they'll come to those sessions like maybe I did 10 years ago and go, wow, this is really interesting. But then you've got people who've been there so many times, like it's cool, but then by halfway through the day, you're going, oh, I'm just going to have a chat with my friends. So we're like, okay, well, how can we do things differently? So, you know, again, it's maybe we're going to try and do some roundtables and things to facilitate strategic discussions or drop-in clinics for your challenges so that the people who are more the decision makers and senior people, they can come in and still find value. So I think that is really the goal, is understanding what is it people need and it's going to change and how do we dynamically change with them. One of the things I really noticed when COVID hit, I was at the Geo chapter at the time, and all of a sudden we went from this really sociable, interactive industry to we're all sitting in our rooms and it's like, what do we do? Oh my God. So I think probably more for our own sanity as a chapter team, we were like, right, we'll do a virtual event. And we got everyone together. We didn't really have an agenda. And loads of people came and we went, oh, we're going to just ask people what they're working on, what they're up to. And then what really surprised us was that the next hour, everyone's like, okay, we'll get a glass of wine and we'll just chat. And oh my God, it was like everyone was just like glad to find some friends again. And then that became a weekly thing for a month. And then we went, okay, this is too much for every week. But then we started doing it monthly. And again, so it was just an evolution. And even now after COVID, we're looking at events and it's not gone back to how it was. And in fact, I was having a conversation at home this week and I'm like, you can never go back. It can never go back to how it was in anything. You're actually always making a new path forward. So now hybrid events are the way, right? But then you've got to look at how you do those things. I was having a call with our chairs of our focus groups for our members. We're planning and we're going, if we do more of these, actually, we need to find our best practices. Like a hybrid event also needs an online moderator as well as the in the room people. So yeah, it's just constantly looking at what have we got and how can we make it just even that tiny bit better to serve the needs of the issuers. And I think the rest falls into place. Very long answer to that.
No, that's good. I might add to it as well, because coming from an outside perspective, having worked with different organizations and different sectors, coming into this, I mean, it's a whole universe. It's like finding on a path a stone and you pick it up. And there is that universe of people who are so friendly to each other, as you mentioned before. It's such a unique community. But also, I think some of the things that ProShare does, I've never seen done by other organizations. And one that really struck me when I first arrived was the event Celebration of Excellence. So yes, it's really important that we showcase what's really good. And we do that through our awards. And I love that in those award entries, you've not just got one company saying, I did this. They're always mentioning, I did this with the support of them and them and them. So it just shows how connected it all is. But also, not only do you celebrate the awards, you then get those winners together and celebrating excellence. And they trust each other enough to go for a whole day and explain what was underneath the submission that they came up with. So that isn't just sharing the fact that they did well. That is trusting others who did really well. These are my secrets. This is how I did it. And it's so open in that way. And it's so aspirational, because underneath that, obviously, is the desire to do things as well as you possibly can and to share the issues. And people can be incredibly frank about saying, it was really hard. And this was the bit that I struggled with. So that openness can only help build the community, but also build the success of the industry.
I think that's a really great point, actually, because one of the things we did as part of our awards was we have a best team award, which really focuses on exactly that, right? Like, who are you working with internally, externally? Because people forget that it's not just your vendor, but it's advisors, it's your internal colleagues in different departments. And I think, you know, celebrating excellence is a really good example of information sharing. And I think I never even looked at it that way as a sense.
But on this award side, it's often a bit like, why do awards? Why are you doing awards, right? But I think that point in terms of, you can have a lawyer, you can have an expert sitting and talking about things and showing some slides, which is of course also of value, but getting these kind of real life examples up there, and in a way of like best practice, but also the challenges you've been through, and kind of sharing the real life setups is something that you won't really find without lifting it up. And often it's much more credible, and it's much more kind of, then you can also tap into the source afterwards. Most likely the people that are winning the awards get some questions from other peers later. So I think it's a very nice way of sharing.
And the awards themselves are so important because everybody's just busy doing the whole year, and it's actually important for these people to get recognition. So even they could take it internally to their stakeholders and go, look, we're being recognized for this great work we're doing. Share plans are important. What I'm doing is important. So it helps your career, it helps the industry. And for example, again, talking about the private piece, I was at an event last week, I think, and we were talking to these companies, private companies who don't know about ProShare, don't know about any of this stuff. And it's like, well, actually, we're already recognizing private companies for having equity and doing these great things for their employees. So it's, again, another mechanism to just highlight how important share ownership is.
This may be to you, David, but when it comes to policy, regulatory issues, and what would you say are the most relevant topics within that you see now? So what do your members care about most right now?
So we did an exercise about 3 or 4 years ago, and we worked with a think tank. We came up with a report. In that, we had lots of ideas about how share plans could evolve, and we worked with the industry. We listened to them. We honed it down into what they thought, because they're the experts, what they thought would actually make share plans better for them. The mix there, what we have to be careful about is distilling out those that are really technical. And the technical side, we deal directly with the civil servants in the departments to try and resolve them. And then there is the stuff that needs legislation of some description. And that's more where the lobbying comes from. And there's real clarity, absolute clarity over the top ask. In fact, we wrote to the Chancellor in November, just before the budget, with 50 companies signing our letter, 20 of them in the FTSE 100. And there, it was making the point that we made before, that we want the share investment plan to be different. We want the holding period to go from 5 years to 2 years, because 5 years is just an alien amount of time. If you're 22 or 23 and you've joined a company and you're in your first job, and yes, the company wants you to join, they want everybody to join, and it's going to be good for you, but you don't know that yet. So you just think, well, I'm not going to be here in 5 years. I can't contemplate 5 years. 5 years ago, I was child at school. So, you know, a long time ago for me, but it doesn't make sense. And the fact that it doesn't make sense means that younger people are actually being discriminated against. And there are other classes of workers where that falls into as well. So the part-time worker as well may not feel as connected as their employer would want them to feel, but also them losing out. So if you're coming from the place where you really want people to participate because it will give them that, you talked about pension benefits. Well, actually, one of the things to really think about as well is that you need a lump sum in the middle of life. You need some bolstering to get you through difficult times.
Agree.
And you always hear the positive stories, and I can reflect those positive stories back to MPs, the people that went on a holiday or bought a kitchen or had a wedding. You always hear the good stuff. One of the things it's hardest to get, but the things I'm really interested in is if you like, the less positive. So, for example, people during COVID told me that their partner was made redundant. So they were able to rely upon their nest egg from share plans to help the family through that.
Good point. Yeah.
And I think when we did that report with the think tank that I just mentioned, we discovered a wealth dividend. The fact that the basics of that was that for people in the lowest income quartile, they had twice as much wealth, as defined by how we talk about that, twice as much wealth as could be accounted for by the money that they had from share plans. And one aspect of that is going to be that when trouble came about, because these are people who are sitting on big nest eggs, when trouble came about, they could rely on this instead of seeking finance elsewhere. And where else do you get finance if you haven't got anything? Well, you get a loan. And if it's a loan, then you're paying interest on it. And if you haven't got very much money, there's lots of behavior change studies that show, well, actually, if you're in debt, you can get a bit careless about debt because what's the point?
Yeah.
So good habits. Now, it may be that these are people that would just be good with money anyway. I don't buy that. I don't buy that because when you're looking at companies that have people, have really good participation rates, then So I just don't accept that argument. But hey, a researcher proved me wrong. So I think the benefits there are really important to showcase in terms of the human benefit. But then, as I say, you've got that other side of it in terms of the clarity of what people want. If you can drive up the participation, effectively you're driving up the number of people who are more engaged with their organization. And as I've said before, the research shows you're driving up productivity. So if you're driving up productivity, then it's an economic value to the state. So either way, you're able to reflect that back. But that's the top offer. There are other ones that spring out from it. Free share, being able to give free shares. That was something that was really popular during COVID, or being able to give free shares to a certain proportion, those on the lowest income, as a way of maybe helping them through difficult times on a shorter time frame, not penalizing people that leave with a tax burden. And there are plenty, but they're in a descending scale, really. So the modernization to reflect that period of time that people work in organizations is definitely top of the list.
Yeah, so kind of reducing holding requirements for getting the tax exempts, basically. That's I think that's also something that we see in other jurisdictions. But I agree, 5 years is quite a long time. Are there any kind of places in the community where you see tension, debate, or is everyone kind of agreeing on most things generally?
I think everyone really is quite agreeable on everything. I think everyone agrees, especially when we did the consultation for the HMT piece there that David was talking about as well. And I was at Fidelity at the time, and we had a lot of our clients come in and have that conversation. Everyone's on the same page. It's the holding periods, the leavers especially. So I think everybody would be quite happy to see any sort of movement in the right direction. I haven't seen anything contentious.
And I think the holding periods is a bit like the companies can, of course, set the holding periods that they think is right for their kind of shareholder value creating and their participants, but then avoiding that because you go below 5 years, then suddenly it becomes a much bigger tax burden. Getting closer to the end of it, about ProShare, how can people engage, learn more? What sort of companies would you typically want to join you at high level?
Thanks for the opportunity. We'd love everybody and anybody to come and join us and speak to us about joining. Even since I've been here, actually, there's been people and pockets of our world peripherally that I didn't know existed who've come and talked to me about ProShare. So that's great. So I think if you've got anything to do with equity, be in touch. That's the first thing. Our membership is made up of providers, advisors and issuers, so the key areas. And there's a huge number of benefits we talked about the networking, the career support, the research, the lobbying opportunities. So whatever it is that somebody wants to get involved with, or if they want support in terms of training, education, our Next Gen program is a big piece as well. So we've tried to do that the last couple of years to make it really clear that we're supportive of new people. If you don't know anyone, we'll find volunteering role for you at events. We'll find ways for you to naturally get comfortable or get the information you need, like our introduction to employee share plans course. So there's loads of things you can do. But in terms of finding out more, engaging with us, I think pick up the phone, send an email, check out our website, drop into an event. Most of our things are open to non-members, at least to start with. And I think just be open. And it's one of those things. Usually people have time or money. If you have money and you want to come in, you're a vendor, you want brand recognition, whatever, tell us what your goals are. We can help find the right things for you. Just like David's doing this great work coming up with a lobbying plan for 2026. We want to do bigger and better things. It's going to require support in all forms. And if you don't have that, but you have time and maybe more junior in your career, absolutely. We'd love to have more resource and more people we can send out to do things. One of the things I want to bring to ProShare in my way of working is we are a small team. So we want to have more groups of people where it's little committees who are doing things, taking ownership. I think that's a really great opportunity when you're younger in your career.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't always get those opportunities in the office. So you can have them here with us. So yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the joys of the last 2 or 3 years is the industry has become more aware about being public in asking for change. So it's a shift in the appetite for campaigning. I may be wrong on this, but I have the impression that those that are delivering on share plans sit within a certain place in an organisation. How connected that is to their public affairs and their lobbying is a question. And I would suggest possibly not that much. But what we've seen since the last government opened up a call for evidence, which we really pushed for very, very much. So it was a great thing when it happened. And then, of course, we have an election, and that call for evidence didn't get an answer until the last budget, the November budget. And we've been keeping the pressure on, because that's the point of lobbying, putting in the parliamentary questions, making sure that MPs are raising with the minister, meeting with ministers, doing all those things to try and make sure we get an answer. And in the end, the answer was not what we wanted, but equally having an answer in itself meant that it's still open and we can still keep going for the changes that we want. It wasn't shut down.
Yeah.
It's neutral rather than bad. I think what I'd like to do over the next year is capitalize on that. Keep that momentum going within organizations to say that your area deserves the attention within the organization to showcase it as something that government should change. So there are lots of big companies that have all sorts of reasons to talk to government about all sorts of important things. We want share plans to be one of them. And to make that happen, we need different things from what we have now. So to talk to MPs, to build that awareness, MPs care most about their constituents. And we have a beginning of a map. We estimate there's going to be at least 2,000 constituents for almost every MP that are part of share plans, that are getting that benefit. They're spending that money locally. That is something that is good for that local economy, but the local MP doesn't know about it. And I struggle to go and tell that story because as an industry, we haven't broken down where those people are and what the top 10 constituencies are and all the rest of it. So we really want to crack that one this year. But also we mentioned that the government's desire for retail shareholders increasing. Well, actually, we want to align with that very much. But to do that, it's important to do research that shows how aligned we are and also how we're dealing with other aspects of issues that the government is concerned about. One, for example, that crosses over into the governance space is there is concern about declining trust. We live in a very unstable, much more unstable world than we used to. People get concerned about it, but the knock-on effect is that trust is declining. Now, in the UK, that trust is really declining quite fast. It's quite disturbing when you look at it. And the top of the trust meter was your employer. But that is going down.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm riffing a little bit now, but showing the connection between employees that take part in plans, employees that are engaged with their employer, and the level of trust that they have and level of satisfaction that they have. We've got indications that show there is a connection. Maybe we should look more at that because that's the kind of thing that does interest MPs. And we want MPs, as many as possible, to be campaigning for us. I mean, we were in the manifesto for the Cooperative Labour Party. That was great. We got in there. But actually, you need the manifesto is delivered on. And to do that, we need a swell of MPs going, actually, we think this change would be good. We can see why it's good for our area. So I will speak to the minister about that. I'll use up a little of my political capital in supporting it. So lots of things that to help us.
You should join me to Norway. We need a bit of that in Norway as well. So
very happy to come to Norway. After hearing about you two going up a mountain, I'm from Scotland. I up my mountains. So
yeah, I think there's definitely this upswing in a momentum opportunity to make what we do more relevant to the government right now. They want to focus on creating more individual investors. You can see that in the changes for the saving limits for cash ISAs versus stocks and shares ISAs. So you can see where they're going. They're introducing financial education in schools this year. So there's a lot of change. And I think, as David said, this is really that opportunity to get some good, solid research, start showing our case in a really transparent, clear way so that they can just take the messaging they need to support some of the changes we want, but also make their case as well. So it's really aligning really nicely. And I think a lot of our gold members have been really supportive in the past. We did an event at Parliament with Equinity's help and support. And so we look forward to our other gold members getting more involved and, anyone and everyone. We also work really collaboratively with other organisations, for example, ShareGift, which does charitable work when it comes to equity and compensation. So I think this year it's inclusivity, collaboration, and trying new things. So
I think with the trying new things, look, there's lots of ideas. The opportunity really is industry could be more involved. We need resource to do it. And we'll be going out to the industry to say, look, we can make this case. We're very enthusiastic about doing so. However, you need to join in. So not only in terms of your intellectual capital and you actually make the case. If you want the change, make the case. Make the case so that we can reflect back, and you can use this within your organizations as well, but we can reflect back the advantages that we all talk about, but actually sometimes you need to move the debate on with a few facts and figures.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think for international relevance, we do work with other organisations that are more internationally focused. And I think we're always open to looking at best practices and joining up and trying to move the needle in the right direction. It can only have a positive impact for each other.
Yeah. And workforce are generally global, so it's good to think across as well. Thanks a lot for your time. This was brilliant. We're to listen into the podcast, and we'll take it from there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.